Well, welcome, Mel, to the Christian Christ and Culture program. Good to have you here. How are
Oh,
you?
Jeff, good to be back.
Yeah, a lot of interesting things taking place in our culture right now.
Very much. A lot to discuss, a lot to debate.
Yes, and one of the comments from someone on the commentary on YouTube, the YouTube channel I have, has objected to prayer during this time. And let me read to you, and we can jump into this. Before we get into this, though, I want to ask you, how are things going with you and your church during this coronavirus crisis?
It's interesting. We continue to develop our technology know how and skill, and it was barely next to nothing when we started out, meaning we got our first computer in 2008 as a church. And fortunately, we have somebody in our congregation who is very skilled with using Facebook and other equipment, and we're basically uh, live streaming by way of Facebook and an obscure web page. So we're making do with what we have. And we're not meeting on Sundays.
Hmm.
So just a few of us will come in and record like on the day before Sunday.
Right. And I think that's pretty much what everyone is doing these days. And they're trying to abide by the government's policy and trying to get this coronavirus situation under control. And that's a great thing. I have heard of a few churches that are resisting. You've probably heard of this church in Louisiana, this mega church down there.
Right.
And I think there's a church in Ohio and smatterings of churches around the area that they seem to want to go ahead and ignore the government guidelines. But for the most part, I think churches are cooperating and saying, let's work this plan and see where it takes us and see if we can get out of this.
Yes. Yeah, I think you'll see churches vastly outnumbering those who are meeting together. The churches who aren't meeting together are
Hmm.
vastly outnumbering those who are.
Yes. And now, while churches are figuring out different strategies to stay in touch with the members, um, it's also a good opportunity during this climate and this crisis to address some of the most profound questions of life. Now, I know a lot of churches are addressing the more immediate psychological and emotional needs of the members of the congregation. That's pretty standard right now for sermons. But I see also there's an opportunity because of the constant reminder of death and danger to really address some of the major, most profound questions of all of life. And as Christians,
Mm-hmm.
we're equipped to deal with those also. And we should take advantage of that during this time. And so I've been producing videos. We've been chatting. We chatted last week, and those videos are now posted and they're being broadcast over cable television, Spectrum cable television, and then, of course, over YouTube and the internet. And we're getting some comments from different people.
Good.
Now, there's a atheist who likes to troll my programs, as atheists are wont to do, right? I mean, I don't know. You've had
Sure.
some experience with atheists, and they love to come into Christian conversations and Christian lectures and topics and just throw in little comments and sometimes not so small comments and just to troll. Isn't that right?
Oh, yeah. And they can be very sarcastic and cynical at times.
That's right. Well, I've got a comment by an individual who objects to Christians praying and objection to Christians pastors encouraging their congregations to pray. So let me read his comment and then we can talk about it. And I'll stop at certain points because he has definitely a totally different worldview assumption. And it's something that, as Christians, I'm not afraid to talk about. You're not afraid to talk about. There's nothing that's off the table as far as philosophy and theology. Christians have traditionally been willing to talk about anything. And so we're going to engage this atheist and his comments. Okay, so I'll quote from him. Stop engaging in opportunistic fear mongering. Yes, we do know what needs to be done in respect to this coronavirus crisis. Because of science, we have a very good understanding of the rate of infection and mortality of various infectious diseases. Estimates regarding COVID-19 continue to get better as we apply more data and science. And thanks to evolutionary biology, we do know how to develop and produce and distribute vaccines. So let's stop right there. He's using evolutionary biology in the Darwinian sense, isn't he? But that's not really what virus vaccinations are produced by, right?
No, and I think Dr. David Menton from Answers in Genesis would definitely say you do not need evolutionary biology to do hands-on science, such as producing a vaccine. Evolutionary biology is irrelevant because it's a worldview. It's not science.
Yes, and Christians do acknowledge, recognize, believe in, and affirm that microevolution takes place. There's no dispute about microevolution. We just dispute macroevolution. You don't need macroevolution to produce vaccines, do you?
Correct. You don't need that. And what we would say as people who believe in the Bible, people who are creationists, there's change within a kind, but you do not see change from kind to kind.
Right. And to develop a virus vaccine, you don't need the whole full-blown Darwinian theory that says that fish become, through millions of years, mammals, and mammals become humans. You don't need that whole grand theory. You only need change within kinds, change within species to develop. That's what's happening here when the coronavirus mutates. It's not becoming a different type of entity, is it?
Right. Deal with things in the present. You don't have to have this Darwinian worldview to bring answers to this current situation. Address the problem with operational science, not historical science. Mm-hmm. And he's bringing historical science, this Darwinian philosophy, which basically it is, it's not science, into this whole matter of coming up with a resolution to this current coronavirus.
Right. And have you found that a lot of atheists and evolutionary biologists will do this all the time? They'll take a case of limited change over time, like we see with these viruses, and then they'll use that as somehow a proof for fish becoming mammals and the grand scale evolutionary theory of Darwin. They'll say, well, see, it's all the same thing. Well, it's actually not, because the viruses, we know they mutate. We know they change over time. That's no problem for a Christian. There's nothing in the Bible that says that species and the kinds don't change, slight variations within. Mm-hmm. And so as Christians, we have to just say to these people that want to try to use every opportunity they can to somehow prove Darwinian grand scale theory, we have to say it has nothing to do with what's happening here with the coronavirus. This is a limited change over time, correct?
Yes. Keep your evolutionary worldview out of the operational aspects of science today.
Exactly. Okay, let me go on here. It says, he says, timing will be everything. The best advice to give your parishioners is to practice good hygiene, cover coughs and sneezes, and wash their hands, disinfect areas of surface that are touched, and to practice social distancing, all in an effort to flatten the curve and spread out the spread over time, as to not to overwhelm our medical facilities and resources. Confessing sins, repenting, praying, and faith will do nothing. What do you have to say about that?
There's more to life than biology. We are not mere material beings. We are spiritual beings. And I really believe that God does use the physical to get our attention regarding the physical, or regarding the spiritual. So what we see going on now should make people think that there's more to us than what we can see visibly, there's invisible components that are present in the world. And for us to be in touch with that the right way, with the right God, is very important during this time.
And do you see also what he's trying to do? He's trying to separate, like you're talking about, he's trying to separate the physical from the spiritual. He's trying to say this is only about a materialistic situation. And so don't waste your time praying. Don't waste your time believing anything in the Bible. This is simply, he's trying to say it all boils down to just science. If you notice in the first part of this paragraph, he's talking about science. Because of science, we have a good understanding, and science will be the solution to this. Now, what does this have to do with prayer? Remember when Mike Pence gathered his team together and there was a photograph of him and his team praying in the White House and praying that God would help them find solutions, and there was a caption under it put out by, I think it was a New York Times journalist or a Washington Post journalist. It said, "We're toast," or something like that, as if praying was a bad sign.
Right. And when I saw that tweet, or when I saw that in an article, I, couldn't help but notice it right away. But to me, it shows that our vice president and those who are with them say, I need an authority higher than myself. And they recognize that authority being God. Mike Pence realizes that he is not supreme. There's only one who is. That is God. So I feel like Mike Pence was humbling himself before God, asking for guidance, counsel, and direction.
Yeah, and I would raise the question, why does there have to be a division between prayer and doing everything the best you can do and using all the resources of the science and financial resources and intelligence resources and everything you can throw at this coronavirus? Why does there have to be a separation between doing your best and praying? A lot of the atheists want to make that division and say, there's something incompatible with praying, or that means that, I guess what in their minds, then in their atheistic minds or godless minds, it means that if you have to pray about something, then the cause is a lost cause, and there's nothing else that can be done. So the last ditch effort. Okay, well, it's kind of like I throw a Hail Mary pass. And that's not true, is it?
Right. That's not true. Mike Pence is a very able-bodied individual who has gifts, talents, skills, and abilities. And I think he's well qualified to lead a commission like he's doing. And he's using all of that in addition to saying, I don't have all the answers in myself. There is a higher authority, God, who will counsel, guide, and direct.
Yeah, and why does there have to be some incompatibility between a guy using his mind and wisdom and resources and also praying to God, who has infinite wisdom, infinite power, infinite resources? Why not ask God for wisdom? Why not ask God for the solutions to these problems? I mean, all throughout history, some of the greatest scientists have been believers and have prayed and have believed in prayer, and credit some of their great breakthroughs to God's inspiring ability. So there isn't anything incompatible with a person praying. It's like a student preparing for a test. I mean, when I was in school, I went through college, I went through graduate school, I went through seminary, and I've done a lot of many years of studying, and I never thought that, I don't have to study for this test. All I have to do is just pray that God will give me an A, and I'll walk in there and know all the answers. No, that nobody does that. That's a straw man. That's a character. And what these atheists like to do is they like to build that straw man and then light it on fire and say, see, that's what you Christians do. But no Christian college student fails to study and then thinks at the last hour they can just pray and God will give them all the answers to the test. No, they study and study and study and do their very best, and then they pray that God will give them the wisdom and discipline and clarity of mind to do good on that test. Isn't that correct?
And all the things that you've studied, you want to have remembered for that test. So it's fine to pray for good recall when those questions, when those tests are being given in that situation.
Yes, and you wanna do your best on the test, and so you study like crazy, and you pray like crazy, and that's what Mike Pence is doing. He's saying, I want to get all the advantages and all the resources I can and throw at this.
Yep.
And I don't blame him. And I would call upon the wisdom of God, the power of God. I would call upon the scientists. I would call upon everyone to try to help. And that's what he's doing, right?
Right. And he's not being arrogant about it. I really appreciate that aspect about his life, as well. As able as he is for the job of vice president, he realizes and recognizes that God is higher. He is the highest authority. And again, he bends his will to God Almighty. And I appreciate that humility that Mike Pence demonstrates.
Right. And now, when I see Mike Pence and his coronavirus task force praying in the White House, that comforts me. That really makes me feel that we're really on the right track because of what we've just discussed. We're putting the best that we have in every aspect, spiritual, financial, scientific, everything we're throwing at this. But to the atheist, for the ungodly unbeliever, they look at that prayer meeting and they're afraid. They react totally different because of their narrow-minded mindset.
Yeah, not only is it narrow-minded, we can handle this ourselves. We have the power. We have the authority. We have the know-how. Where somebody like Mike Pence recognizes, I don't have it all, and I need to call on someone greater than myself. And to me, like what you said, it was a comfort for me to see him pray. I was not at all taken aback by that. I said, good, he's praying. He's seeking out God in a situation like this. Mm-hmm. But for those who say, I can do it any way I want to me, that can spell slipping up sooner or later.
Right. So what would you respond to this atheist who says to me as a pastor, he's saying confessing sins, repenting, praying, and faith will do nothing. I repeat, it will do absolutely nothing. What would you say to him?
Well,
sounds like a pretty big claim, huh?
Yeah. To me, when you make a claim like that, you're dismissing all what eternity is about. But you're also dismissing, I think, what the immediate situation is about. Because I think a person who humbles himself is in a much better position to handle something that is an emergency than one who merely approaches it arrogantly. And prayer is a humble act. And having that aspect of repentant heart also, I think, clears away things that may become clouded that result from an unrepentant heart.
Right. And what my comment to this atheist was that he's making an preposterous statement. He's overplaying his hand. Mm-hmm. He's putting himself way out there that he can't back up. He's not saying that, oh, you Christians, prayer doesn't do what you think it does, or prayer isn't at all what the Bible teaches it is. He is making a categorical, absolute statement that says prayer accomplishes nothing. And I responded to him saying, What an absurd statement. Of
Right.
course, prayer accomplishes something. And I mentioned to the fact, let's grant the atheist his naturalistic thinking, his materialistic atheistic thinking. Let's say that it actually doesn't do what Christians say it does, but let's just say it's more or less like a placebo in medicine. Placebos work. The
Yeah.
doctors give people pills. They have tests that have confirmed the placebo effect actually works. So, on a materialistic, atheistic perspective, the statement that prayer is accomplishing nothing is absurd, because even if you reduce prayer to this little caricature of what it is, it still accomplishes something. But as Christians, we know that prayer accomplishes a lot more than just
Right.
emotional and psychological comfort. It actually is an interaction with God Almighty.
Hmm.
And so this statement that he makes about prayer accomplish, he actually says confessing sins, repenting of sins, praying, and faith will do nothing. That statement's absurd.
Yeah, absurd. And I would say, how does he know? How does he know it accomplishes nothing?
Well, what he says later on, he says that please respond to the fact that one can go to any hospital and see that terminally ill children die at the same rate, regardless of the parents' religious beliefs. How would you respond? He's trying
Well,
to
I would,
make a empirical, some kind of a
yeah,
test that says, well, the children of Christians die at the same rate. I don't know if that's true.
yeah. I
Again,
don't know if that's true or not. And I would tend to lean in an opposite way, but let's take for granted that he is.
right.
Is prayer merely about what we truly desire or wish? Or is prayer an act in which we humble ourselves before God, seeking his will
Right.
and rest in that will? Though there are things about it we don't understand, and that can time frustrate us in the midst of grief that we're going through. Prayer is merely not getting what we want,
Right.
but being a people who are submissive to his will.
Right. And that's another thing I mentioned to him in my reply, is that why are you boiling prayer down to this sort of like vending machines? Put in a
Yes,
coin and you get your product out the door. That's the only
yeah,
thing he is seeing prayer as. He's saying, okay, here's my coin, and there's the machine, that's God, and I put the coin in, which is prayer, and then my answer comes down and I walk away satisfied. And that is not the Christian view of prayer, is it?
correct. No, it's not. And I think you drew up a very good word picture there of a vending machine. God is not reduced to a vending machine. His ways are mysterious. We cannot comprehend the will of God and the way in which prayers are answered, and those answers may not be the kind we initially want.
Exactly. It's like a child going to their parent. They ask their parent for something, but it's not just all their interaction with their parent is not just about asking for things. It's
Mm-hmm.
relating to their
Mm-hmm.
parents. So
Right.
the atheist totally misconceives prayer. And then
Yeah.
in their misconception of prayer, they try to use their misconception as proof against prayer for Christians. And we want to just step back and say, whoa, you got the whole idea of prayer wrong. You're not even talking about the same thing. We're talking about prayer as communication with God. It isn't just
Mm-hmm.
limited to asking God for things.
Yeah.
Prayer is a lot of the things he talked about: confessing sin, repenting of sin, worship, praise, thanksgiving. Oh, you just go on and on. Prayer is so much more than the atheist caricature of it. And we put our request to God. We ask God. Mike Pence and his coronavirus task team, I'm sure they're asking, Lord, help us to find a solution and guide our steps, give us wisdom, and so on and so forth. And some of those things God will answer in the way they prayed it, and other things God will answer in a different way. But you're putting your trust and you're depending on him, and you're becoming, you're not prideful and you're not arrogant, and you're humble and willing to change. That's something we can even talk about, is what might be the reasons why God is allowing this to come through our world at this time. And it may perhaps be a lot to do with our arrogance and pride, right?
I think you're absolutely right. And as you're talking there, I couldn't believe it, but I thought of Bob Dylan when he said, God's not your errand boy to satisfy your wandering desires. And when we, again, talk about the aspect of prayer, it is also used, like you just mentioned here, alluded to, a way in which to get our attention, to humble ourselves, to have us realize there's more to this world than merely what we see, and merely bank accounts, economy, and a comfortable lifestyle.
Exactly.
Because sometimes affluence, I heard somebody say, affluence can turn into affluenza, like a spiritual affluenza. And man, we have been infected by that.
I have heard of that term, affluenza.
Yeah.
And which is a good time. In our next segment here, let's talk about perhaps what could be some of the reason why God is permitting this to happen. Of course, we don't have any kind of prophetic authority other than God's word to tackle this question about what God could perhaps be up to in allowing this to happen. We know that he is doing something, and oftentimes we just have to try as best we can to try to figure out what he's doing and find out what he wants us to do as a result. But this atheist totally mischaracterizes prayer. And in fact, he goes on, he says, in fact, it may have the opposite. Prayer may have the opposite effect by giving people a false sense of security. Praying before you go to a social gathering like church, or praying while you're at church, praying over church picnic or buffet at your favorite sit-down restaurant will do nothing but increase exposure. So he's saying that not only prayer accomplishes nothing, but actually it could actually make things worse because it gives you a false sense of security. What do you have to say about that?
I would just disagree with his premise. Prayer is a means by which God uses to strengthen our assurance we have in Christ, so that when testings come like this, I think they help us to show where our faith really is. Pastor mentioned the other day, he said, you can tell your people, be thankful for the storms, because they will show where your feet of faith truly stand. And our stand is upon the solid rock. And it was just last Sunday where we sang Christ the Solid Rock as one of our congregational hymns, though they sang it through the way of Facebook streaming. But the concept of this time being one in which we can examine our faith and see where it's really at is a moment where prayer can help us to get that focus.
Right.